A History of Role-Playing Games in 101 Objects, Chapter 11, 5th edition. D&D 4th edition has, let's be honest, been a failure. And in fact, D&D lost its position as the #1 role-playing game to Pathfinder in that decade. And obviously Wizards of the Coast, now owned by Hasbro, want to rectify this. So what's called D&D Next has been in development for quite some time with a sort of semi-public beta test, if you like, play test. And eventually the game is released in 2014, initially in July with the release of the starter set. Rather unusually for 5th edition, they released the starter set first. In previous editions of D&D, a starter set or something like this had come out later, and it was the 3 main rulebooks that were released first, but they decided to go with the starter set to essentially contain the basic rules and get people used to the changes that they'd made, which was sort of quite significant over 4th edition, to some extent going back to a 3rd edition kind of feel, but trying to get some old school mechanics in as well. And in fact, they involved some of the designers of various old school type clones had come into the project as consultants. The starter set was really good, and it's probably the best starter set of any of D&D starter sets, in my opinion, with the exception of things like the Mensa basic set and the Moldvay basic set, going back to D&D basic. Let's just open it up and see what you get. You get a fairly nice set of dice, fairly conventional set of dice, although you'd get 6. It's by and large more standard nowadays to have 7 dice. Not sure what they went with a set of 6. You get some character sheets, pre-generated character sheets, which is an interesting thing. You get a rulebook, a thin rulebook, a thin paperback rulebook, which has nevertheless, all you need to get going, really. You can do quite a lot with this. And you get, and this is the highlight for me, you get the adventure Lost Mine of Phandelver. I say adventure, this is a mini campaign, and it's a really good one. You've got some dungeon crawling in here. You've got some NPCs to meet and interact with. You've got all sorts of things. There's a lot to. It's a great introduction to Dungeons and Dragons for starter players, for low level characters. I like Phandelver enough that I'm going to say it now. I think in 20 or 30 years' time we'll look back on Lost Mines of Phandelver in the way that people like me look back on The Keep on the Borderlands. I think it's that good. It deserves to be considered in that bracket as a classic D&D adventure, regardless of whether you like 5th edition or not. Thing is, though, most people do like 5th edition. It's been hugely popular, and not just because it's been compared with 4th edition, which was so unpopular. 5th edition has really worked, and it's brought people back to D&D that had given up, that had either gone on to Pathfinder or gone to old school games, or had gone on completely different role-playing games, or even had given up role-playing games entirely. 5th edition has done really, really well. So that was a starter set that came out in July 2014. A month later, we had the first proper hardback cool rulebook, which is the Player's Handbook. And here it is, Player's Handbook. Rather better art than 4th edition or Pathfinder, I think. In fact, art in 5th edition, it's mixed. There are some bad pieces of art that I really hate. There is a particularly bad halfling somewhere. I think it might be in the Player's Handbook. Let me see if I can find it. But for the most part, the art in 5th edition, I think, is a pretty high standard. And there's a lot of it, and it's a glossy hardback. It feels nice. I'm going to see if I can find this bad halfling for you now. Half elf, half orc. There are some things I don't like about 5th edition D&D, don't get me wrong, although I think probably that's more some of the culture that's grown up around it rather than anything to do with the rules mechanics. Oh, here we are. Here is this awful piece of halfling art. What the hell is that? It's certainly no Hobbit. I don't like that. What's going on with its feet? It's tiny feet. And it, oh no. So there is some terrible art in 5th edition, but there's also some, that's nice, isn't it? And you know, they feel nice. They've got this sort of slightly rough texture there, the smooth texture there. Their 5th edition books just feel like a premium product, even the standard editions. And quite a few of them, they released like a premium edition with a limited edition cover. We've had some of those in stock, and they're really nice too. But 5th edition, they're nice to flick through. They're well written. It pays a lot of tribute to older editions. So there's frequent references to, you know, characters, monsters, and so on from earlier editions, and even when they haven't introduced officially a campaign setting from the past, they reference it frequently. Which, you know, for an old role player like me, I appreciate immensely. Mechanically, it's not hugely different from any other form of D&D. It's not as reliant on miniatures as 4th edition was. One clever new mechanic is the advantage-disadvantage rule, which is so clever it's amazing nobody really thought of it beforehand. Very simply, and this is probably oversimplifying it a little bit, but if you've got some form of advantage when it comes to make a roll, then you get to... So it might be you're trying to pick a lock, and you've got all the time in the world, and it's completely silent, and you've got really good quality thieves' tools. Then the DM might say you've got advantage here. And what that means is you get to roll your d20 check twice and pick the best result. He might say you've got disadvantage. So you're trying to pick a lock, but it's really, really noisy. You've got really poor quality thieves' tools, and you're in a hurry because there's a guard about to come around the corner. And he'll say you're at disadvantage here. And you roll your d20 check twice and have to take the worst result. That's such a simple, easy, brilliant rules mechanic. You could use that so often without having to fill the rulebook with extra rules. Great stuff. Genius. I believe the YouTuber who broadcasts on YouTube as RPGPundit, whose stuff I really like. I recommend checking out RPGPundit's channel. I think he was heavily involved with that. In fact, may even come up with the advantage-disadvantage mechanic. In which case, RPGPundit, you're a genius. So the player's handbook was Object 88, Object 89 with a Dungeon Master's Guide, which... but amazingly, we don't have in stock at the moment. We're just sold out of. I forgot on this week's order to order another one. I do try and keep the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual in stock all the time, and we're out of stock of Dungeon Master's Guide to make do with this photograph. That's what the Dungeon Master's Guide looks like. The character on the front, incidentally, is a Sararak before he became a Demi-Lich. Well, he had essentially in his full body form from Tomb of Horrors. So, yeah, a nice reference back to a classic first edition adventure. We like that. So, you might guess what the next object is. Object 90 is the Monster Manual. Let's show you what the 5th edition Monster Manual is, with a brilliant drawing of a brilliant painting of a beholder on the front. Quite like that beholder. And again, it's got most of the classic monsters, as you'd imagine. Xorn. We're somewhat overstocked on Xorn miniatures, I must admit, so I keep showing people Xorn to try and persuade them to buy some Xorn miniatures from us. $4.99 for a pair too, pack of two. Mummy, Hippogriff, Dow, Dragons, Spined Devil, all sorts of stuff. All the classic monsters are in there, really. So you've got the same 3 core rule books that we've had essentially every edition going back to first edition AD&D, and they're great. And 5th edition has been hugely successful. People have come back to 5th edition who had switched to Pathfinder. People have come back to 5th edition who maybe had stuck with earlier versions of the game, and it's been a huge seller. Wizards of the Coast keep claiming that D&D is selling better now than it ever did before. I've seen some people quibble with the statistics and suggest that actually it's not selling as well as things like the Mensa Red Box Basic set did in the 1980s. I don't know. But there's no way around it. Dungeons and Dragons is more and more popular now than it has been in a long time, and has a presence in popular culture that it hasn't had in a long time as well. You know, you can watch television programs, all sorts of television programs, you know, just sitcoms will now reference Dungeons and Dragons that, you know, wouldn't have been the case 20 years ago. And not always in a negative way either. I think you're generally used to Dungeons and Dragons players being portrayed in a negative, nerdy way, and that's no longer the case necessarily. Stranger Things, Community. I've just got into watching Community. It's quite a nice little sitcom. Big Bang Theory. On Big Bang Theory, oddly, they seem to play 4th edition. And that's always something is wrong. Sheldon plays 4th edition D&D. There's no way Sheldon Cooper would have switched to 4th edition D&D. He would have stuck with 3rd, or maybe he'd still be playing 1st or basic. He's resistant to change. He's not going to go to 4th edition. And he would have researched, you know, and he would have come out with the decision that 4th edition wasn't very good. So I don't think Sheldon would play 4th edition. So that's Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition. And it is absolutely dominant in the marketplace right now. We'll come to that when we get to chapter 12. But right now, 5th edition D&D, in terms of people playing and in terms of sales figures, is absolutely where it's at. Even though, in many ways, Wizards of the Coast possibly learned from mistakes that they made in 3rd edition. So there's not really an open gaming license as such. There's this thing called D&D Beyond online, which allows you to sort of sell stuff for 5th edition, but there's certainly not the explosion of material for 5th edition that there was for 3rd edition under the old OGL. So it is hugely popular, but in terms of how much material is available for it, not as much as you might expect. So we're now it's been out for almost 6 years. And in terms of Wizards of the Coast official releases, only 10 adventures or so, although they all tend to be thick hardback campaigns, essentially following on from Paizo's adventure path idea. So you'll have, rather than in the past you would buy a softback and adventure and it would be an adventure for characters of 6th to 8th level or something. Nowadays you will buy a hardback campaign and it's an adventure that will take your characters from 1st to 10th level and you'll level up all the way through. That's another mechanical difference of 5th edition compared to early editions, is that leveling up is much quicker, which I know a lot of old school gamers hate. I actually, and I consider myself to be an old school gamer, I actually like that. I think low level D&D, mid level D&D, high level D&D are very different games. In a way, and it's nice to enable players to experience all three without completely giving up the rest of their life. So I approve of that. Yes. So 5th edition D&D. Well done, Wizards of the Coast. Well done. That's the end of chapter 11, and then we'll do chapter 12, which I'm going to call Roll for Initiative. And chapter 12 will actually be our final chapter in this history. So yeah, that monster manual, that was object 90, and we've got 101 objects to get through. So I will see you next time.